my vampire patient. Dr. Adrian Calloway prided himself on being unflappable. As one of the foremost physicians in hematology and rare diseases, he'd seen it all: conditions that baffled his peers, patients with symptoms straight out of Gothic novels, and cases that blurred the line between medical science and the supernatural. But none of that prepared him for the woman who entered his private practice one cold, moonlit evening. She arrived without an appointment, her slender frame draped in a flowing black coat that swirled around her ankles. Her skin was pale, not the pallor of someone sick, but of alabaster, flawless, and cold to the touch. Her eyes, deep crimson at first glance, shifted to an unsettling shade of violet under the fluorescent lights. Adrian couldn't help but notice her beauty, otherworldly and captivating, like a painting come to life. There was a strange pull in her presence, a mix of fear and fascination, as if she were a dangerous flame and he a moth, unable to resist. "Dr. Calloway," she said, her voice a silken whisper, "I'm in urgent need of your expertise." Adrian rose from his desk, his initial irritation at the intrusion melting into curiosity. "Miss Vanya," she supplied, her lips curling into a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just Vanya." He gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head. "I'd rather stand. Time is not on my side, doctor." Adrian adjusted his glasses, studying her more closely. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was something off about her. Her movements were too graceful, almost predatory, and her gaze lingered on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Yet amidst the unease, Adrian felt a stirring curiosity. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a silent plea for help, that touched something deep within him, despite every warning bell ringing in his mind. "Very well, Vanya," he said, retrieving a notepad. "What seems to be the problem?" She hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Her eyes darted to the window where the city lights cast long shadows across the room. "I consumed something. Someone. I shouldn't have. A man. His blood. It was tainted." Adrian blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Tainted how? Was he sick?" "No," she said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "Not in the way you'd think. He was a junkie, as you humans call them. His blood was riddled with chemicals, toxins. And now—" She trailed off, clutching her abdomen as if in pain. Adrian's mind raced. The symptoms she described didn't align with any condition he'd encountered. Yet, her tone carried a gravity that made him take her seriously. There was something haunting about the way she spoke, as if her words carried the weight of centuries. "What are your symptoms?" he asked, stepping closer. "Weakness," she admitted. "Nausea. My senses are dulled and my cravings are uncontrollable." Her voice faltered on the last word, her eyes darting to his throat. Adrian's breath hitched, a sudden realization dawning on him. The pale skin, the aversion to light, the fixation on blood. It was absurd, but the pieces fit a horrifying puzzle. Yet, even as a chill ran down his spine, he couldn't look away from her. The way her lips parted slightly, the way her crimson eyes seemed to see through him. It was both terrifying and magnetic. "Are you trying to tell me," he began cautiously, "that you're a vampire?" Vanya's lips curled into a smirk, revealing sharp, pearlescent fangs. "Now you understand, doctor, and before you dismiss me as a lunatic, I suggest you look at this." From her coat pocket, she produced a small vial of blood, its contents shimmering unnaturally under the light. Adrian took it with trembling hands, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "I need you to analyze it," she said. "Find out what's wrong with me and fix it. Otherwise—" Her voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "I won't survive." Adrian's throat went dry. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss her as a delusional woman with a penchant for theatrics. But the desperation in her eyes and the undeniable evidence of her fangs silenced his skepticism. He gestured toward his lab. "Follow me." The lab was a sterile, state-of-the-art facility, a sanctuary of logic and reason. Adrian set the vial on a workstation, his hands steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Vanya hovered nearby, her presence like a shadow that refused to leave. Every step she took seemed calculated, as if you were aware of every sound, every vibration in the room. It was unnerving, yet oddly alluring. "This will take some time," he said, glancing at her. "You might as well sit." She perched on a stool, her movements as fluid as liquid. "Do you always work alone this late?" she asked, her tone conversational but her gaze sharp. "Usually I find it peaceful." "How ironic," she murmured, her lips twitching. "A man of blood finding peace in solitude." Adrian ignored her, focusing on preparing the blood sample. Under the microscope, the cells looked wrong. They pulsed faintly, as if alive in a way human blood shouldn't be. The chemical composition was a chaotic mess, riddled with foreign substances that defied explanation. Every glance at the swirling chaos beneath the lens made his pulse quicken. What was he dealing with? "This isn't possible," he muttered, adjusting the magnification. "What do you see?" Vanya asked, her voice tight. "Your blood is alive," he said, struggling to find the right words. "It's metabolizing toxins at an accelerated rate, but the process is unstable. It's like your cells are fighting a war they can't win." Her expression darkened. "Can you fix it?" Adrian leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start. This isn't medicine. It's something else entirely." Vanya's eyes flashed, and for a moment he thought she might attack him. Instead, she closed them, taking a shuddering breath. "I don't have much time, doctor. If you can't help me, I'll have to feed again. And I don't know if I'll survive another mistake." Adrian's stomach churned at the implication. He'd never been one to believe in monsters, but now one sat before him, pleading for his help. And despite every instinct screaming at him to run, he couldn't turn her away. He couldn't let her leave, not just because she needed him, but because he realized he didn't want her to go. "There's one thing we can try," he said slowly. "A transfusion. If we can dilute the toxins in your blood, it might stabilize your condition." Vanya tilted her head, considering. "Will that hurt you?" "I have a supply of universal donor blood," he clarified. "No need to worry about me." She smiled faintly, a flicker of gratitude in her otherwise guarded demeanor. "Then let's proceed." Setting up the transfusion was straightforward, but the atmosphere was anything but. As the sterile equipment hummed to life, Vanya watched him with an intensity that made his hands tremble. Her presence was magnetic, her beauty otherworldly, but beneath it all was a fragility that tugged at something deep within him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a stirring of something beyond his professional duty, an ache, a yearning to protect and understand this enigmatic woman. The edge of danger she carried only sharpened his fascination. "You're not what I expected," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Adrian glanced at her. "What did you expect?" "Someone older, colder, less, She gestured vaguely at him. "Handsome?" He chuckled, the sound surprising even himself. "And you're not what I expected from a vampire. Less Dracula, more mysterious femme fatale." Her laughter was soft, almost musical. "Flattery won't save you if this fails, Doctor." "Noted," he said, his focus returning to the task at hand. Yet he couldn't shake the warmth her words stirred in him. For someone who thrived in solitude, the connection he felt with Vanya was both unsettling and exhilarating. Every moment spent with her was like balancing on the edge of a knife, thrilling and dangerous. The procedure began, the dark crimson of her blood mingling with the fresh supply. Vanya's breathing slowed, her body relaxing for the first time since she'd arrived. Adrian monitored her closely, marveling at the rapid changes in her vitals. Her complexion warmed just slightly, and the tension in her frame eased. "It's working," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Vanya opened her eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You're full of surprises, Doctor." Adrian couldn't help but smile back. Despite the strangeness of the situation, he felt an inexplicable connection to her. She was a mystery, a creature out of legend, but in that moment, she was also his patient, and perhaps something more. His heart raced as he realized he didn't want this to end. The transfusion lasted an hour, and by the end of it, Vanya looked almost human. Her eyes had softened to a deep amethyst, her fangs retracted, and her movements lacked the predatory edge they'd held before. "How do you feel?" Adrian asked, his voice tinged with hope. "Better," she admitted, standing with newfound grace. "Stronger, but I'm not cured, am I?" He shook his head. "No. This is a temporary fix. Whatever you are, your physiology is beyond anything I've studied. I'll need more time to understand it." Her expression darkened, but she nodded. "Time is something I can grant you, Doctor, for now." As she moved toward the door, Adrian felt a pang of regret. "Vanya," he called, "if you ever need help again, or if you'd like to talk more, outside of all this." He hesitated, feeling his heart pound. "Would you let me take you out for dinner?" She turned, her gaze softening in a way that took his breath away. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "You're a rare man, Adrian Calloway," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "I'll consider it." And with that, she vanished into the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the faint, lingering scent of roses. Yet this time, Adrian didn't feel alone. He sat in his now quiet office, a small smile on his lips, and realized one thing. He hoped she would return not just for his help, but because he wanted to see her again.